What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking another look at the BLU F91 5G about a year after my original review and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy at this point. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with this phone, we're getting a really large 6.8-inch LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 396, and a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. So for what it is, this is really a great display. At 6.8 inches, again, this is a really large display. So if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, especially doing stuff like reading, where you might want things to be a little bit larger and easier to see, you are going to get a great experience here. And the 1080p resolution is also giving us a nice sharp image. So in general, if you are looking for a more affordable phone that has a really nice display, you're definitely not going to go wrong here. Now for storage, the BLU F91 5G is getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so definitely plenty of storage here. For the average user, I want to say you're probably not even going to need a microSD card, and even if you're constantly downloading apps and games and stuff like that, the option is always there, which is more than you can say for most higher end devices that typically don't have microSD card expansion. So if storage is a priority for you, then that's something you're definitely not going to have to worry about with this phone. Up front, we got a real nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. And then for video, this phone has a max recording quality of 2K in the rear camera and then 1080p in the front. So in general, we got a great camera setup here. And honestly, I really have no complaints. The only thing I guess could have been better is maybe adding 4K video recording instead of 2K, but honestly in this price range, most phones don't even have 2K, so really no actual complaints here. We're getting pretty much every camera feature, including an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera, so if you're taking a lot of pictures and you want a good variety of features, then you're definitely going to be happy with the camera setup here. Now to give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the BLU F91 5G. And overall, I do think the photo quality here is really good. Sure, compared to a much higher end device, it's not going to be near that level, but again, keep in mind this is really an affordable entry-level kind of phone, so you can really only expect so much, and honestly, for what it is, I am pretty impressed here. For the average user, for things people typically use smartphone cameras for, stuff like Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, sending photos to friends and family, or maybe taking vacation photos, for example, for your own memories. Regardless, no matter what you're doing, the photo quality here will be plenty good enough. Now, of course, if you're really taking a lot of pictures and that's really one of the main things you're doing with your phone, then yeah, in that case, you might be able to justify spending a good amount of money on a higher end device. But for those of you who are really just looking for something more basic and maybe you still like to get the occasional nice photo every now and then, I do think this phone will be perfectly fine for you. Now for the RAM and processor, with the BLU F91 5G, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 810 processor. Overall, the performance here is pretty good, but honestly, it really depends on what you're comparing it to. On one hand, if you're coming from maybe an older flagship phone, for example, that's maybe older but a bit higher end, like a Samsung Galaxy S9, for example, that phone is really old to the point where I would definitely not want to buy it now. But at the same time, I feel like it's going to be significantly faster than this. But on the other hand, if you're coming from more of an average mid-range phone, or even a lower end device, compared to something like that, I do think the performance on this phone is actually pretty good. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance wise compared to your current device. Because again, depending on what you're coming from, it may or may not actually be an upgrade, and in some cases, it very well could be a downgrade. But overall, for more basic activities like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe playing a game or two, I do think this phone will be perfectly fine. But if you're going to be on your phone really like all day doing more demanding activities like maybe editing a video on CapCut or some kind of app like that, then yeah, in that case, you might want to spend a bit more and get something higher end and just faster in general. But honestly, how many people are actually going to be doing that kind of stuff on a regular basis? So in reality, I feel like for the average user, this phone is really going to be perfectly fine. So while not being the fastest, if you are looking for something that has at least decent performance, along with 5G connectivity of course, the BLU F91 5G will be a pretty good choice. For the battery, with this phone, we're getting a really large 5000 mAh battery that also supports 18-watt fast charging. So definitely great here, I have really no complaints. With the 5000 mAh battery, you can expect to get great battery life and longevity. And having had this phone for over a year now, I can definitely say the battery will last for quite a while. So if that is more of a priority for you, this phone will be a great choice. The charging speed is also pretty decent, but keep in mind, to fully utilize the 18-watt fast charging, you will actually need to use an 18-watt charger, so definitely keep that in mind. Now, another battery thing I do want to point out here is that with the BLU F91 5G, this phone actually does support wireless charging, which is pretty cool. Even at this point in 2023, not very many phones that aren't flagship phones have wireless charging, and even some entry-level flagship phones like the Google Pixel 6a, for example, still don't have wireless charging. So seeing the feature in a phone this affordable is definitely impressive. Now for the software, I feel like this is pretty much the worst thing about this phone. So unfortunately, this phone only has Android 11, and knowing BLU's software support, which is notoriously bad, I'm 99% sure this phone is not going to be getting any kind of major updates. So yeah, that is really too bad, because at this point in 2023, Android 11 is super outdated. So on one hand, I know some people out there might actually not care at all about the software, and in that case, I guess this is perfectly fine, because in general, despite having a kind of old software, things do run at least decently here. But at the same time, I feel like for most people, maybe you don't care about having Android 13 and a bunch of major updates, but you probably want something at least decently newer, and at this point, Android 11 is not it. I could understand if it would be like Android 12, which is kind of pushing it, considering maybe in like 6 months, Android 14 is probably going to come out. But I mean, Android 11, that's kind of tough, and it is really too bad, because aside from this, I feel like this phone is a really good value. But as far as other features go, again, I already mentioned that this phone does have wireless charging, but in addition to this, it also has NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, keep in mind, you can use that feature with this phone no problem. But in conclusion, my general thoughts about the BLU F91 5G about a year after my original review. In general, I feel like for what it is, in pretty much every area except the software, this phone does provide quite a bit of value for the money. At this point, it's gotta be really cheap. I haven't looked at the exact price lately, but there's no way I would spend more than maybe $200 on it, if that, because you can get something like a Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, for example, that's honestly a bit better than this phone for around $199 factory unlocked. So yeah, if you can get this phone for significantly less than $200, I might consider it. It has a great display, plenty of storage, decently good performance, a nice camera, a really large battery, and features like wireless charging and NFC. So it's definitely not a bad phone, but really the biggest drawback here is the software. I honestly don't know how important that is to most people, but I feel like having Android 11 in 2023 is just a little too outdated. But again, if you can deal with that, then provided that you can find this phone for a decent deal, I would say at least under $200, if not around like $150 or so, then in that case, for what it is, the BLU F91 5G is still at least worth considering. But this concludes my 1-year review for the BLU F91 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am going to be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.